Chapter 23. The little island shook again, but this time it felt different. Aneela, holding Maximus close to her, looked down at Victor's body. The knife stuck out of his chest. His eyes were open and unseeing. The very air pushed down on all of them as the island rose. Something strange was happening. The sun was rising in the distance, casting everything orange and purple. The Hexel slithered around aimlessly, so used to Victor's guidance. Andor ran up to the dwarf and retrieved his knife. Aneela's 3 guards had been too distracted by the island's behavior to stop him. Andor ran to the shore and looked down. The water's edge was gone. Aneela looked about herself and saw they were several feet in the air now. The island was flying. Andor turned back, looking panicked. He held the knife in front of him, breathing heavily. Aneela, Shay, Tolino, and the guards watched him. "I will not let you take me," he screamed at the group. "You never had that choice," a voice whispered behind him. An arm wrapped around his chest, and then he felt a hot pain in his back. Blood filled his mouth suddenly. He felt something slice into his back, and then quickly get pulled out. He turned and saw an unlikely sight. Rhys, husband to Aneela and king of the island, was staring at him. The man grinned wickedly at Andor as he backed away to rejoin his family. Andor stood there, on the edge of the large drop, coughing up blood. He looked up the hill, behind everyone else. Standing there was Joffrey, his son. "I can't, Joffrey," he whispered. "I won't live without you." With that, he fell backward. He fell for an eternity, toward the ocean far below. He never felt the impact. Aneela turned around, but didn't see her father anymore. He'd vanished. The island continued to rise, higher and higher. To Rhys, she said, "How did you get here?" He pointed to something. She saw a large rock formation joining the small island to the main island. A land bridge. "I was swimming, but then the island started to rise. I crossed that bridge the rest of the way. And now we must use it to get back," Aneela finished. "Look!" The bridge started to crumble before her very eyes. "Everyone," Rhys shouted, "get on the Hexel!" The giant weed slithered toward them. Aneela and Rhys climbed on. Aneela told one of the guards to grab Victor's body. Together, the group rode the Hexel as it snaked its way across the land bridge toward the main island, which towered far above. The bridge continued to crumble below them. The parts that connected to the tiny island broke away. The island fell into the ocean. The noise and sights were almost too much for Aneela. She held tightly to Maximus as Rhys held tightly to her from behind. Aneela didn't know how they would get to the top of the island from where they were now. Before today, she'd never known of the land bridge's existence. She also hadn't known the island could fly. They got closer to the rock wall as chunks of earth rained down on them. Aneela grew more nervous as they raced to the very solid wall. "Hold on, everyone!" Rhys shouted. The Hexel drilled right into the rock wall, as only a Hexel could. Aneela closed her eyes as the brightness of the sun was replaced by darkness. The Hexel tunneled through the earth, with 7 bodies on its back. Aneela counted the seconds to distract from the claustrophobic darkness. Minutes later, they emerged from the ground. Astrid emerged from the tunnel to Repatha's cave, up through the giant's kingdom and out of the frozen pond. She flew out of the ring of mountains and looked around her. The earth was no longer quaking, and the lava had ceased spewing. Everything seemed calm now. In fact, she almost thought she was in her realm among the clouds. They were high up now, much higher than they used to be. She could no longer see the ocean that had surrounded Dargo Island. Where were they? She flew around the island, over a flock of Floxen and a herd of Bethels. Repatha's necklace, the one Josh had been wearing, sat in her palm. This was the only thing that could tether her to the physical plane. This was more than her father ever had during his reign as nature demon. Whenever he wanted to walk on land, he had to possess someone. Astrid would not have that problem. Her turn as nature demon would be different. It would be exciting. It would be new. The people of Repatha Island gathered in the cemetery. Victor was placed in his own coffin in the mausoleum next to Josh, due to his sacrifice to save the queen from Andor. "Fellow Repathians," Anila said to her people from atop the hill, in front of the mausoleum. "Once again we have faced great challenges, and once again we prevailed. Not all of us survived. We lost friends, but their sacrifices saved us all. Josh Debelko gave himself to the island's soul, Repatha. Had he not done so, we all would have perished. Victor saved me. I'd known him all my life. He was around when even my father was a child. I'm ashamed to admit I didn't know him as well as I should have." Anila paused, choking back tears. She saw Astrid standing next to Shay among the surviving islanders. There were so few islanders left. "We just faced our greatest danger," Anila continued. "If we can survive this, we can survive anything." The islanders cheered. "But, my lady," a man called once the cheers died down, "where are we?" Anila looked around at their strange new surroundings. "It appears we're in the clouds." The island had reached the cloud cover after departing the sea, and no one had seen anything since. No sky, no sun, no ground, nothing. It was like they were in limbo. No one seemed worried, however, and Anila was grateful for that. Wherever they were going, she knew they would be all right. People everywhere watched the news footage of the large island floating in the sky. Up, up, up it went, and it seemed it would never stop. Josh's parents watched with open mouths. Estevan, Josh's best friend, managed to pull his mouth away from his girlfriend Rebecca's and cheered from his room in Fort Worth, Texas. He didn't know why he did so, but it felt right. The news groups broadcast this footage from aboard naval ships and helicopters. Everyone in the world saw a gigantic waterfall suddenly appear between the ships and the island. As quickly as it appeared, it connected with the other side of the ocean where the island had been. Water rushed in to fill the gap. The island continued to rise until it disappeared in the clouds. Wes stood at the edge of Lacey, his feet in the water, and stared out at the endless dark ocean surrounding him. The stars were shining above, like usual. He truly was alone in this town. He'd searched for nearly a day and found no one. They must have died out long ago. The curse of being a life-sucking demon was that you usually outlived everyone who wasn't a life-sucking demon. But now he had no one and nothing, and he was fine with that. He was ready to die, but he didn't want to die alone. Something in the distance caught his attention, which was quite a feat because he was surrounded by the brightest stars known to man. There was a light in the sky. It broke through the cloud bank. Wes had to cover his eyes just to look at it properly. When his eyes adjusted, he saw it was an island. It was bigger than the one on which he stood, and it glowed from some inner light. "Repatha?" he shouted, waving. "You really did turn into an island." Why she had returned was beyond him, but he was grateful. He'd been alone for far too long. Something happened, something that had never happened during his stay in the town of Lacey. The stars slowly vanished as the sun rose in the sky. The land of constant starlight would need a new name, it seemed. Astrid sat in the coffee shop, sipping her hot tea, and just people watched. She was in Dallas, watching her work, the snow, fall onto the streets. People piled in, laughing and shaking it from their clothes. Astrid wore a turtleneck and brown jacket, a white cap on her head. She watched a young couple sit together near the entrance. Seeing them made her think of Josh. She missed him so much. The first time she saw him, on the island, he'd been so nervous. He had just started the job of guarding her neighborhood, and he'd been ordered to keep her inside. This was back when everyone thought her father was the bad guy. All that time, she could have been getting to know her father instead of hiding from him. All those years wasted. She tried not to think of that. Thinking of what Rockne did to her, to everyone, made her angry. Whenever she got angry, the weather got really bad. Right now, she wanted everyone to enjoy the snow she made for them. After finishing her tea, she got up and left the shop. She aimlessly wandered the streets of Dallas, trying to decide upon something to do. She'd already checked the weather in the other parts of the world, and everything was perfectly balanced. She looked down at the green gem hanging from her neck. It really was a nifty little charm, even if it came from the dreaded Dargonius. After Rapatha docked with the land of constant starlight, Astrid had left to return to her cloud castle. Though that strange land was in some weird part of the world no one knew about, it was relatively easy to come and go. Mom did it, splitting her time between Rapatha and Astrid's home. Everyone else on Rapatha decided to stay there, however. That strange land now experienced regular cycles of day and night, and was a much happier place than when Astrid first went there. She returned to her castle and went up to her father's study. She missed him so much, and it pained her not to be able to see and practice weather control like they used to. After finding out he was innocent of most of the crimes Rockne accused him of, Astrid spent as much time with him as possible. Though it hadn't been much, it had been enough to realize he was a good man, and that he loved her very much. Astrid turned to leave the study when she suddenly remembered something. When he was alive, her father and Josh had gone to some nexus to talk with past nature demons. Nauki had said only spirits could go there, and at the time, Astrid hadn't gone through the transformation. But now... Use the ashes of the previous demon in order to establish a link. She looked at the urn she knew held Nauki's ashes. She grabbed it and poured a little on the floor, forming a small circle. She set the urn down and stood in the circle. And then she waited. For a moment, nothing happened. And then the ashes lit up, and she was transported. Her senses were assaulted. She couldn't see or hear anything around her. She could barely open her eyes due to the blinding brightness, and she heard a loud hum in the air. She pressed her palms to her ears, but that only dulled the sound a little. All of her skin felt really sensitive, so much so that even her clothes felt like they were scraping her. "Dad?" she called out, though she could barely hear her own voice. A moment later, the sensations died down enough for her to focus. She looked up and saw herself surrounded by thick clouds. She felt like she was in a canyon. "Dad?" she called again. But again, she got no response. Finally, she heard a voice say, "Astrid?" She smiled and looked up, way, way up, to the very top. A face appeared out of the cloud wall, a face she recognized. "Hey, Dad,"